So what I'll be doing is, in many ways, a much simpler thing that you saw Troy show and also DJ. This is basically just a portrayal of some data I got from the National Weather Service under National Atmospheric Administration. So basically what they provide on their website is a set of data that you can download that has the precipitation on a grid. And so I'll get into the details of how I downloaded the data and how I prepared it, so forth, put it on this grid and everything. But just to cut to the chase here, the final result in Spotfire is this visualization over the southeastern part of Texas. Here's Houston, of course. The dark colors here show the larger amounts of precipitation. So the grid here is color-coded by the amount of precipitation per hour over a series of little grid cells here. This slider here actually accumulates the precipitation data over some time frame. So it's in this page, there's actually a couple of pages here, but in this page here, to look at the actual details of the precipitation, it's best to have a fairly narrow window of time. You just kind of roll this little time slice window through the time zone. So what I've got is I've actually downloaded about 3 days worth of data in August when Harvey was approaching the Texas shoreline and Houston area, and you can see this data for those 3 days. And so the thing to realize about this graph is that the colors here are actually color-coded by, it's kind of a floating, a dynamic color. So the maximum and minimum are actually changing through time. So as you see a real band of the hurricane kind of approaching, the maximum kind of jumps up here. At the early part of this plot there, the maximum was like, 1.7. So this is actually a fairly small amount of precipitation. But the other plot on the next page I'll be showing in a second here does show a constant scale, so you can actually see things in the perspective of all that. But just to let you see it kind of a instant by instant of what the actual instantaneous bands are doing. So this really gives you a sense of, as Harvey is approaching the Texas coast here, you can actually see these individual bands of precipitation as they hit the coast. I hadn't quite appreciated that. You see these bands and these satellite images of the hurricane, and those actually do correspond to literally these bands of precipitation as they move in. And what occurred with Harvey, of course, as DJ showed, is that as it approached the coast here, we all saw it on the news that it just kind of stalled there. So Harvey just kind of stalled, and with the counterclockwise motion, it just like drew all this warm air from the Gulf here into the land here. So as I go along here, the center's like right over here, but the main brunt of the precipitation actually was taken up by the Houston area. So we're really exploring, you got this data set you can download from the National Weather Service, but you can really explore using Spotfire, just the dynamic visualizations let you just really see in great detail. Of course, I can zoom in on this if I want to, zoom in and study things in greater detail. I can actually do that. So it's really, Spotfire is just a really great way to understand what's really going on here and to really get a sense of what's going on. I'll be getting into the configuration of this as I go through here, but yeah, basically it's a way of really seeing visually what's going on with this event. If I slide this back here and jump to the next page actually uses a fixed scale, and what I'm going to do here is actually just move the right-hand side and look at the total accumulation. So the with the filter here in Spotfire, you can use it in a couple of different ways. One, you can look at the sort of instantaneous snapshot, and in that sense, it does make sense to use a kind of a floating scale here. But in this sense, I found it was quite useful to use a static scale that goes from 0 to, about 48 inches of rain. And as I move this upper boundary here, I can basically see as the hurricane kind of sweeps in and the individual bands apply. There you go. So I have this scale kind of turning kind of a purple color. So as the extreme amounts of precipitation arrive over time, well, it was just amazing. You really understand that the most time Harvey's eye spent was over here, but because of the geometry, here's the Gulf, here's all the warm water over the Gulf, all these individual bands of rain just accumulated over time to really hit this area of Houston very hard. So it was just a weird combination of the path of Harvey. It just stalled here. It just didn't move because of the high pressure system and so forth, and the direction of motion there just accumulated all the precipitation there. So that's kind of the end result. I thought I'd go back and talk about how I put all this stuff together. So one of the key things about this visualization is that we have a grid. It's kind of hard to see, but if I zoom in here, the places where precipitation, the grid kind of drops away. So I'm actually only showing the grid in the time areas and time zones where, locations where there actually is precipitation. So here there's a small amount of precipitation, so everywhere it's kind of a cloudy color. But at the very beginning, there actually is no precipitation area. So one of the key things in making this visualization is to set it up in such a way that the grid itself actually goes away. So let me actually jump over to the where I got the data from. So the data is from the National Weather Service, part of NOAA, and you can go to this website and download individual files. There's actually a part of this website you can do this programmatically. So as part of this, I set up a loop to just go through, and I went through systematically and downloaded these files from the National Weather Service. If I look at the tables themselves, this is worth taking a little look at. So here's what I actually get from the National Weather Service. I get the, the year, the month, the day, the hour. So they're hourly files across a grid, and the grid is actually set up. This is HRAP, which I forget what it stands for, but it's an internal grid that they use. It's a stereographic polar projection, which they've described. But they give these X and Y coordinates in their own internal grid system. They also provide a latitude and longitude. So, and here's, of course, this is the actual precipitation value in inches for that hour for that grid cell, in that grid cell area. You can plot this as directly in Spotfire as just a series of points. It doesn't show up as nicely, I think, as on this grid here. One point, though, is that the individual files are actually downloaded in a shapefile format, but they only contain point data. So I ended up just using the point data out of the download files. This HRAP grid, let me just jump over to this thing and I'll jump back to it. So the grid actually is documented pretty well in the by NOAA, by the National Weather Service. It's the Hydrological Rainfall Analysis Project, or HRAP. It's actually a fairly well-established, well-documented system of coordinates, but it is, it's a polar stereographic map projection, and they've got a certain polar setup. So you have to, to make these areas, you have to basically go in and kind of dig into the details of that to do this. So I ended up constructing my own grid using that documentation. So what I ended up getting at the end is using these HRAP X and Y coordinates, constructing an ID over here. Actually, I made a string version of this, which I then can use to match against the grid that I made with the tear, with R, basically. And R has a shapefile package, so you can actually read or write shapefiles freely into tear, into Spotfire, back and forth. So if you need to create a shapefile, it's very easy to do this. In this case, what I created was the entire grid here. So the grid you saw on the first page is a grid that I created to match this precipitation data set. So once I got the corners figured out, then it was pretty straightforward to create that grid. Now, the other part about this is the layer setup. So if I go into my map visualization here, normally you would say, oh, I'm going to make a map visualization Spotfire. I'm going to bring in the shapefile as its own layer. It turns out that when you do that feature you saw where the colors go away when there's no data, that's easier to do with this configuration, this ultimate configuration. So what I have here is, if you look at the shapefile layers, there's of course the background layer, and this layer actually being shown here is it comes from that precipitation data table. That's the point-wise, hour-by-hour data table here. So the value of doing that is that when I apply the filtering, it's filtering and directly filtering out the this precipitation. Now, this is still point data, but it's appearing as a feature layer inside of Spotfire. So to get that to work, normally you would have the precipitation data appearing as a point-wise, but the feature layers is basically used typically for shapefiles. So the second part of this is the actual hookup of the geocoding. I'm getting a little bit of the weeds here, but essentially what you do is you use this geocoding feature to do a feature by, and you use that mapping to the key variable here. So this is kind of the secret sauce of how you do this. And you basically match it, you geocoding using that, that's the shapefile grid that's coming in here. So I'm using the geocoding from the grid itself to display this visualization. All right, so I guess this is a long-winded way of saying that, when you're done here, the advantage is that as you're basically filtering over the timestamps in that precipitation point data, and it's responding very, very rapidly. You're able to either look at the hour-by-hour data, or if I want to look at the accumulation in a certain time period, I can actually stretch this out and look at the accumulation. And then, of course, conversely, where there is no data for a certain time zone, the grid just drops away, just kind of melts away there. So there's that sort of unusual setup there using the, in the layer of the map thing, I'm using the actual point data. That's the way to get this to work.